In 1882, a woman ran barefoot through the snow, clutching a journal that could have ended 5 men's careers and possibly a secret government experiment. That woman was Martha Cooperfield, the mayor's wife. She was found dead by sunrise, eyes wide open, fingers ink-stained. Her death was ruled natural. But nothing about it was natural, because what she wrote down, whispers of arranged deaths, hidden experiments on townsfolk, a syndicate of 6 men controlling a Pennsylvania town like a puppet show. It was so dangerous. It vanished. The journal? Burned. The witnesses? Dead. The mayor? Promoted. But we found what survived. The torn pages, the sealed files, the pattern no historian would touch. And once you see it, you'll never trust your hometown again. This is not a ghost story. It's a case file they swore no one would ever open. The mysterious murder of Martha Cooperfield, the mayor's wife who knew too much. You were never meant to hear this, but now that you have, you can't unhear it. Beat. Then silence. The screen fades to black. Logo appears. On the night of January 6, 1882, in the snow-choked streets of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, the wife of a powerful mayor ran barefoot through the dark, clutching a journal she was willing to die for. That journal was never meant to surface. Its pages were burned, its contents erased. And Martha Cooperfield, declared dead of natural causes. A cold body, wide-eyed, ink-stained fingers, still clutching truth like a dying woman screaming into history with no one left to hear her. But this is not the story they buried. This is the story they were afraid you'd find. Because when a man builds an empire on secrets, the one thing he fears most is a woman who can remember everything. Martha Cooperfield was no ordinary housewife. She was the silent observer in the velvet halls of political deceit, the one who served tea at parties where men planned ruin. She didn't just overhear, she recorded, she decoded, and she connected the deaths no one else wanted to admit were happening, deaths the mayor called accidents that the sheriff never investigated, that the coroner signed off with a trembling hand. But Millbrook was never just a town, it was a prototype, a closed system, a controlled experiment in power, fear, and silence. And Martha, she was the system's first fatal error. What she uncovered wasn't just corruption, it was orchestration. Patterns that stretched back years, a circle of 6 men, bankers, doctors, judges, who moved together like gears in a machine too smooth to notice. A secret arrangement to siphon federal contracts, silence dissent, and mold public perception like clay. A group that knew, to rule a town forever you don't need guns, you need control of the narrative. And the death certificates. This video contains dangerous knowledge. Not metaphorically, I mean that literally. Because what happened in 1882 didn't end in 1882. It evolved. The same techniques, the same mechanisms of silence and control. They never disappeared. They were perfected, upgraded, sanitized for modern times. And what Martha Cooperfield saw, what she wrote down in those 17 forbidden pages, might explain not just what happened to her, but what's been happening to you. Are you ready to hear what they killed to keep silent? Good. Because once we begin, there is no way back. It was a forgotten coal town, choked by fog and soot, 40 miles from anything the powerful cared about. But in the 1870s and 80s, it became something else, a test site. Not for weapons, for influence, for how far men could bend a town before it broke, and whether anyone would notice. They started with industry. Theodore Cooperfield, the man history calls a mayor, was in truth a social engineer. He wasn't elected to serve, he was installed to observe. Theodore didn't just run the textile company, he ran the supply chains, the hiring roles, the banks issuing credit, and the pastors preaching obedience. When a man can control your pay, your debt, your health, and your eternal soul, what you have is not leadership, you have ownership. Martha saw this, but not all at once. She saw it in fragments, the way you only recognize a trap when you're already inside it. Her journals, hundreds of pages before the final one, document the rituals of control. Mr. Wexley's son denied mill job due to union sympathies. Pastor Hughes preaches loyalty to employers. Mayor insists charity begins at home after coal tax passed. These weren't observations. They were data points in a psychological map. And Martha began to realize the entire town was structured like a behavioral experiment. One man is denied work, another sees it, fear spreads, another accepts a lower wage. A woman speaks out, she's disinvited from church socials, her husband gets passed over for a shift bonus, and so it goes, until the entire town is conditioned not to speak, not to ask, not to see. They didn't need fences or guards, the people became their own jailers. And as Martha followed the trail, through ledgers, minutes of private meetings, and whispers at garden parties, she started to understand that the men her husband called friends were something else entirely. They were the architects of a closed system. And every system like that has one hidden rule. No one gets out alive who knows too much. The first rule of psychological control isn't secrecy, it's misdirection. Theodore Cooperfield didn't hide power behind locked doors. He displayed it in plain sight. His generosity, his charm, his openness. He held town halls, kissed babies, handed out turkeys at Christmas. He made the people believe they mattered, so that they never noticed how little they actually did. Martha documented the illusion with surgical precision. In her November 14th entry, she described a citizens' forum where 3 local businessmen asked about irregularities in payroll taxes. Theodore listened kindly. He nodded. He promised transparency. 2 of the men were fired within a month. The third, found dead in his barn, ruled a suicide, but here's the trick. He didn't die by hanging. He was poisoned. Martha included the coroner's notes. No signs of asphyxiation, signs of internal bleeding, stomach contents withheld for testing. The test never happened. Dr. Marcus Fielding, a member of the Inner Circle, signed the death as suicide and sealed the report. Do you see the pattern? Power isn't about force, it's about narrative. If you can control the story, you can control memory. If you can control memory, you can bury reality. And if reality is buried long enough, eventually people stop looking. But Martha kept looking. She began tracking the timing of deaths, how they always coincided with financial audits, union organizing efforts, or whistleblower letters. She began mapping out who attended the secret Sunday meetings at Hartwell's estate. She created her own ledger, not of dollars, but of disappearances. And that's when she discovered the names no one else dared whisper. Not just Theodore, not just the sheriff or the coroner, but Judge Brennan. And a contact listed only as R. Langley, Depps, of War Contracts, D.C. This wasn't just a town conspiracy, it was federal, and the woman who uncovered it, she was marked the moment she wrote that name. There is a phrase that appeared repeatedly in Martha's last journal. 3 words, the arrangement exists. She circled it, she underlined it, she repeated it more than 24 times across her last entries. The arrangement wasn't a contract, it wasn't even written down. It was an understanding among powerful men, an invisible handshake that stretched beyond Millbrook, beyond Pennsylvania, possibly beyond the country itself. Every time Martha traced a payment, a land transfer, or a falsified death certificate, the same pattern emerged. Money funneled from federal infrastructure projects, laundered through fictitious accounts at Millbrook Bank, reappearing in the ledgers of political campaigns or charitable trusts. A closed circuit of wealth, of silence. But the money wasn't the point. It was the control. When you own the judge, the doctor, the banker, and the sheriff, you don't need to threaten people. You just let them know that if they speak, no one will believe them. If they run, no one will look for them. If they die, no one will question it. Martha came to call it the manufactured reality. She wrote, "It is not that the people do not see. It is that what they see has been shaped so carefully, so systematically that their eyes no longer trust what their minds whisper." She knew the arrangement wasn't just about Millbrook, it was a template, a beta test for controlling populations by controlling their environment. Shift perception and you shift behavior. Create fear, then offer protection. Allow dissent, then punish it invisibly. Modern psychologists call it compliance conditioning. Martha called it soft tyranny, but tyranny doesn't tolerate scholars. And when Martha cracked the code and wrote those 17 pages of names, dates, and deals, she signed her own death certificate. But what she didn't know is that some of those names are still in power, and the arrangement still exists. Men don't die for nothing. Not when their boots are clean, their time cards forged, and their deaths too tidy to be real. Martha listed 7 names, 7 men who died within 24 months. All had one thing in common: they were immigrants. And more importantly, each of them touched money. Mill foremen, bank clerks, record keepers. Not a single one was poor, not a single one was a drifter. These weren't throwaway lives, they were loose ends. But Martha didn't just document the deaths, she mapped their connections. In the margins of her journal, she created something terrifying, a constellation of influence. From every dead man, a line connected back, not just to the mayor, but to every man in the inner circle. Lines through checks, ledger notes, committee appointments, church affiliate, ions. It was a web, and in the center, drawn in black ink, one word: obedience. She began to see it everywhere. The schoolteacher fired after speaking at a protest. The grocer whose shop burned down after refusing to extend credit to the mill. The preacher whose sermons shifted overnight after a private dinner with Judge Brennan. They didn't just kill to silence. They destroyed reputations. They erased identities. They rewrote the rules of trust. You weren't allowed to not belong. You weren't allowed to not participate. This wasn't governance. It was ritual. A recurring act of submission and domination where only those inside the arrangement thrived. Martha, through logic, through notes, through observation, became the only person to see it all, and they knew. They watched her getting closer every day, and when she decided to write it down, not in letters, not in gossip, but in black and white proof, she became something far more dangerous than a wife. She became a witness. And that meant only one thing: she had to disappear. Most men think power is loud. They think it comes with commands, declarations, violence. But the most dangerous power is the kind that whispers, the kind that smiles as it removes you from existence, the kind that signs your death in ink, files the paper, and calls it progress. Martha realized this the night she read the coroner's handwriting. Dr. Marcus Fielding had ruled 7 deaths, accidental or natural, and yet all 7 men had traces of chemical inconsistencies in their tissues. Martha didn't have the modern term for it, but she knew what it meant: intentional poisoning. She'd copied from public records the descriptions of skin discoloration, gastric bleeding, erratic heart rhythms, all ignored, all attributed to stress, alcohol, or weather. She consulted old medical texts: arsenic, strychnine, belladonna, all easily administered. It all leaving just enough ambiguity for a coroner with influence to explain away. But why poison? Because poison buys time. It lets the guilty control the narrative while the victim fades quietly. No blood, no violence, no suspicion. Martha wrote, "Poison is the preferred weapon of men who need to erase, not destroy. They want silence, not chaos, disappearance, not memory." And she realized the poison wasn't just physical. Millbrook had been poisoned mentally, slowly, generationally, through sermons that taught obedience over truth, through schoolbooks rewritten to glorify the town's benefactors, through marriages arranged between powerful families to maintain lineage and loyalty. It was never about wealth alone. It was about containment, keeping the town inside an invisible perimeter of fear. Martha finally understood the real purpose of the arrangement. It was an experiment in shaping belief, and she was the only one who could still see it clearly. That clarity made her powerful, but it also made her a target, and the poison was already on its way. What happens when a woman sees too much? In 1882, she dies. But not with fury, not with a scream, no, she dies with a lie written into her death certificate, and a story erased before it could ever be told. But Martha wasn't naive. She understood legacy. That's why she didn't just write a journal. She created a cipher. 17 pages filled with names, dates, transactions, but also embedded codes. Words circled twice, dates that didn't match up until you compared them across entries, references to passages in books only kept in the Millbrook Library's private archives. It wasn't a diary, it was a key, a coded indictment of the 6 most powerful men in Millbrook, and perhaps the men they answered to. And one line written sideways in the margins of page 11, in her smallest, most trembling script: "If I fall, let the next man rise. Fear is the real poison. Break the fear." That line by itself explains why this video matters. You see, every generation produces its own Martha, someone who sees the cracks in the system and dares to ask why they were built that way. But most never make it this far. You did. So I want you to lock it in, psychologically and symbolically. Comment this phrase below, twice. Break the fear, break the fear. Because once you say it out loud, even in text, it becomes harder to ignore what you've seen. This is how we begin to dismantle control. Word by word, truth by truth, symbol by symbol. Keep watching. Martha's story isn't over, because what she did next changed everything. And it's the reason you're hearing this story at all. Martha Cooperfield's final act was not an escape. It was a message. On the night she fled into the snow, she knew the odds. She'd read the reports. She'd traced the power lines. She understood that the people chasing her weren't amateurs. They were engineers of silence, assassins in suits, and one of them was her husband. But what no one expected was what Martha carried inside her. Not just the journal, but intent, strategy, resolve. She had hidden 3 copies of her final journal entries, each disguised inside the bindings of unrelated books from her private study. She had marked them subtly. Donation, Millbrook Library Archive, February 1882. She had no intention of surviving. She had every intention of being discovered by someone not yet born, and that someone might be you. You think this is just a story? Then explain this. 2 of the books Martha marked were later catalogued under the wrong Dewey classification. Moved, forgotten. One resurfaced in a Philadelphia estate sale in 1927, the original leather binding still intact. Inside it, pages torn out. Only faint indentations remained. But one of those indentations, it matched the exact phrase recovered from Martha's autopsy file, sealed in a locked vault until 1964. He watches from behind kind eyes. Who? Who did she mean? Theodore, Judge Brennan, or someone above them? Because Martha understood something chilling in her final days. The men in Millbrook weren't in charge. They were managers, operatives in a chain of command that extended far beyond Pennsylvania. And what she saw in their eyes was fear. Even they were afraid of someone. Every hierarchy answers to something higher. In Millbrook, that something was Langley. That name appeared only twice in Martha's journal, a cryptic reference, R. Langley, Deptains of War Contracts, D.C. The man had never visited Millbrook. No one in town spoke his name, but financial records showed 3 wire transfers from a federal holding account in Washington to Millbrook Bank, each dated 1 week before a town audit was halted. That wasn't coincidence. That was clearance. Langley wasn't funding the town. He was funding the cover-up. Martha's investigation led her to a chilling conclusion. Millbrook wasn't the only town. It was a node in a larger network, small communities across the country, each run by a compliant mayor, a silent sheriff, and a doctored population. Test beds for behavioral control. Strategic silence zones. She wrote, Langley's reach is cold, unseen, but the men here fear him more than they fear X. Posure, he is the reminder that they are not free men, only elevated servants. And that's where this history becomes present, because the model perfected in Millbrook didn't vanish with coal and cobblestone. It migrated into public relations firms, lobbyist circles, social algorithms. They no longer need sheriffs with badges. They use influence operations. They don't erase people with poison. They erase them with character assassination, digital exile, or untraceable events. But make no mistake, the arrangement still exists, and the Langley you need to fear isn't a man. It's a system, a protocol, a methodology, a mechanism for keeping power in the hands of those who already have it. And Martha nearly broke it. The final page of Martha's journal is damaged, scorched at the edges, stained with what might be blood. The last lines are nearly illegible, but forensic imaging done by an anonymous researcher in 1997 revealed these words, faint but chilling. If you are reading this, they have failed. You must go deeper. You must show others how the world is made. That line was her last breath into the void, a transmission across time. And that's what we're doing here. You see, this story isn't about 1882. It's about what was built on top of it. The platforms, the policies, the belief systems you were taught to trust, all of them traceable, if you look carefully, back to experiments like Millbrook, places where obedience was manufactured and called virtue, where memory was rewritten and called progress, where silence was purchased and called peace. But Martha Cooperfield left something behind, something no one expected. A fracture, an imperfection in the system, a story so dangerous, so persistent, it survived through whispers, through documents lost and found, through researchers who vanished, through scholars who died broke and ridiculed for chasing what they called conspiracies. But you are here now. And once a man hears this truth, really hears it, he changes. You can't unknow this. You can't unsee what's coming. And that, my friend, is exactly why they buried her story. Because the moment a man learns how the world is made, he stops asking for permission. Power requires ritual, not in the theatrical sense of cloaks and candles, but in repetition, symbolic action that reinforces who rules and who obeys. Martha began to notice the same patterns every year around April 3rd, a private gathering at the Langhorne estate. Officially, it was a spring civic council dinner. Unofficially, it was something else. 6 men attended, always 6, the same 6 who held seats across Millbrook's highest offices, a judge, a banker, a physician, a schoolmaster, a preacher, and Theodore Cooperfield, the mayor. Martha watched from a distance, traced the deliveries, the symbols carved into the side of imported wine crates. The candles made not from wax, but tallow, animal fat, with a faint chemical smell. The music was always the same. Bach's Ich habe genug. The meal. Veal bread, 1 black pomegranate cut into 6 slices. She found the records of these orders, cross-referenced them, with letters hidden in her husband's study. The April gathering was not a dinner, it was a reaffirmation, a contract, renewed in silence. She wrote, "The arrangement must be reaffirmed each year, or else the cracks appear. They need the ritual, not for belief, but for containment. Because belief wasn't necessary for control, only participation. If you sit at the table, eat the food, speak the phrases, even without conviction, you bind yourself. Ritual is psychological architecture. It makes obedience feel sacred. And Martha refused to obey. She never entered the room, never ate the food, never watched the ceremony directly. But she recorded it, word for word, gesture for gesture, because she understood. If you can map the ritual, you can dismantle the spell. And that was the first true threat to the arrangement, not rebellion, understanding. The first man to break ranks was not a saint, he was a coward who ran out of options. Judge Malcolm Brennan, 71, diabetic, hated by even his friends. In March 1882, he collapsed in his courtroom during a hearing. A stroke, they said. But his last words were not random. Witnesses recalled them clearly. The girl knows, she has it all. That girl was Martha. The panic that followed was visible. Theodore disappeared for 5 days. The sheriff filed no report, and the preacher gave a sermon on the virtue of forgetfulness. Martha knew something had broken. Later that month she received a letter, unsigned, sealed with wax that bore the Langhorne estate crest. Inside, a single sentence on fine paper. He was never supposed to speak. You're not supposed to breathe. No return address, no fingerprints. But now she knew. They were watching. She moved her journal entries to a hidden floorboard under the guest bedroom, created decoy diaries, began sleeping in different rooms, and more importantly, she sent a message of her own. A sealed envelope addressed to her cousin in Albany. Inside, 17 names, 9 dates, 2 photographs. Insurance. That envelope never arrived. The postman disappeared. His body was found 10 miles out, face eaten away by wild dogs. Official cause: animal attack. Martha stopped writing for 5 days. Then, a single entry. No cavalry is coming. I'm alone. But I will make this hurt them. That was the moment Martha ceased to be a wife. She became something else. A recorder of death. A cartographer of the unspoken. A living indictment. And they knew. Time was running out. Theodore Cooperfield was not a villain. He was something worse. He was a man who traded love for leverage, who saw his wife not as a partner but as a variable, one he believed he could control. But Martha saw through him, and her final journal entries reveal a slow, surgical dissection of his soul. She wrote, "He speaks with 2 voices, one for me, full of honey, one for the others, full of rot." She had begun recording their conversations, not with devices, they didn't exist then, but with memory, near-perfect recall. She would return to her journal after every dinner, every walk, and transcribe their words exactly. She memorized tone, posture, phrasing, and that was when she noticed it. The code. Ever. By time Theodore spoke of the arrangement, he used specific phrases. Certain men have certain responsibilities. They were chosen because they could bear it. This is how order is maintained. It wasn't language, it was conditioning. A script embedded into every man in the circle, recited like gospel. And that's when Martha's fear turned to clarity. The men in Millbrook were not authors of the system, they were repeaters, trained echoes of an older doctrine. They weren't chosen because they were strong, they were chosen because they were obedient. Martha saw that her husband didn't understand the full truth. He didn't know who truly ran the arrangement. He was just another useful son, promoted, praised, then discarded when inconvenient. And she knew the time would come when even he would turn against her. But she didn't run. She sharpened her mind like a blade, because she wasn't just going to survive, she was going to outlive their lies. There was one place in Millbrook that no one questioned, the church, a Gothic stone structure with stained glass that looked imported but wasn't. The preacher, Father Elam Wren, was soft-spoken, charismatic. He never married, rarely left the church grounds, and held meetings late at night that weren't recorded. Martha attended one service, only once, and what she saw changed everything. The sermon was on obedience, but it wasn't biblical, not in any traditional sense. There were no psalms, no mention of Christ. Instead, The readings came from a red-bound book with no title. The verses spoke of the order, the spiral, the great remembering. She noted the phrases. Afterward, she approached the preacher with a question. He smiled. Then he whispered in her ear, "You're not from Millbrook. Not really, are you?" It wasn't a question, it was a test. She didn't answer. She left the church. That night, someone slashed the tires on their carriage. The next day, a dead fox was left on their porch, its mouth stitched shut. The message was clear: stay silent. But now Martha understood that the arrangement wasn't just financial or political, it was spiritual. At its core was not greed but ideology. A belief system passed down through ceremony and bloodline. The arrangement wasn't just a group, it was a priesthood in disguise, and Father Elam Wren was its gatekeeper. Theodore came to her the night before she disappeared. His hands were shaking, his eyes swollen from drink, and for the first time since their marriage he asked for permission to talk, to confess. He told her the truth, not all of it, but enough. How he had been groomed since age 14, how he was chosen by Judge Brennan during a school debate for his composure and lack of sentiment, how the arrangement offered his father protection during the 1871 land seizure scandal, how he was married to Martha not for love but to watch her. She was too smart to be left alone. His words. He cried, genuinely. But Martha knew it wasn't love, it was fear. He'd seen what they did to Brennan. He knew his time was next. She asked him one question. If they ordered you to kill me, would you do it? He didn't answer. That silence was all she needed. She packed her journal, locked the false floor, left the decoys, lit 3 candles in the window as a sign, one of her old codes from childhood used only in emergencies. And she ran. Into the cold, into the dark, and into legend, because what she left behind was not just a mystery, it was a weapon. The official account says Martha Cooperfield died of exposure, that her body was found 3 days later in a shallow ditch outside Millbrook's southern forest line, that she died alone, with no injuries except for frostbite, that she had no journal, that her death was tragic but not suspicious. But there's a page missing from that report, a page torn out of the coroner's log, recorded on January the 9th, 1882, 3 days after Martha vanished. The missing entry was later found by a groundskeeper's son in a burned trash pile behind the old Langhorne estate. The handwriting didn't match the coroner's. It was written in charcoal, like someone scrawling the truth before it could be forgotten. The page read, "She was found with both eyes open, pupils dilated, tongue blackened. Not from frost, but from something else. Skin etched with a pattern I've never seen. She died seeing something she wasn't supposed to." The coroner was never heard from again. That same week, a fire broke out at the Millbrook Town Records office. Destroyed were marriage certificates, property records, and land deeds dating from 1868 to 1881, including the original registry of Martha Cooperfield's journal notes filed 6 weeks earlier for protection. The arrangement wasn't just silencing her, they were erasing her from the inside out, not through brute force, but through paperwork, compliance, silence, a bureaucratic cleansing of truth. And by the end of that month, the town moved on. The story was rewritten, the people forgot, or pretended to, because forgetting wasn't a flaw. It was the system's greatest weapon. But not everyone forgot. There was one man who risked everything to preserve what Martha knew. Not a hero, not a rebel. A school janitor named Elias Dorn, 53, widowed, war veteran, worked nights at the local schoolhouse where Martha had volunteered to teach girls how to read and write. Quiet man, kept to himself, but he had seen things. During a cold November evening in 1881, Elias had been cleaning a classroom when he found a page tucked under the blackboard, an early draft of Martha's journal. Not a full entry, just a scrap. It read, "There is a clock buried beneath this town, not one that tells time, one that resets memory." Elias didn't know what it meant, but he knew fear when he saw it. He began collecting other scraps Martha discarded. Notes, torn letters, observations. Over time, he constructed a shadow journal, his own reconstruction of what she was discovering. And when she vanished, he knew she hadn't run. He wrote, "She didn't flee. She sacrificed herself so the pattern could be seen. She let herself become the echo." Sir Elias kept her story alive by telling it, one child at a time, in whispered stories passed to orphans. In chalk patterns he etched on the underside of desks, in bedtime tales that weren't tales at all, he encoded the arrangement into myth, because he knew they can destroy facts, but they can't kill symbols. Millbrook changed after Martha's death. It didn't fall, it calcified. The arrangement didn't celebrate. They consolidated. The Langhorne estate was sold to a Delaware holding company. Father Elam Wren retired suddenly and left for Europe. Judge Brennan's name was removed from every public building. Theodore Cooperfield remained mayor, but only for 2 more years. Then he vanished too. No funeral, no obituary. Just a notice in the Millbrook Gazette. Theodore Cooperfield has resigned and relocated for personal health reasons. We thank him for his service. But if you followed the trail, it didn't lead to rest. It led to an asylum in western Pennsylvania known as Winterhold Institution, closed in 1904 for inhumane practices. A former nurse later testified, years later during a separate investigation, that one of the patients spoke in Latin, scribbled symbols in blood, and repeated one name every night before screaming himself to sleep, "Martha, Martha, Martha." That patient's identity was never released, but the initials in the intake records were TC. The arrangement didn't spare Theodore. They erased him too, because to the machine, loyalty is not protection, it's fuel. Elias Dorn died in 1899, no obituary, no headstone, buried in the public cemetery, Section 8. But before he died, he left behind a sealed box, given to a librarian named Claire Winslow with instructions to open it in 1922. She never did. She passed it to her son. Then it vanished. Until 1981. That's when a demolition crew uncovered a metal box beneath the floorboards of the old Millbrook schoolhouse. Inside, 47 pages, wrapped in linen, soaked in cedar oil, faint handwriting, diagrams, names, rituals, Martha's journal, or what was left of it. It wasn't complete. The pages were fragile, but they were real. And what they described matched too closely with property records, grave registries, and tax logs from the time to be dismissed. A professor at the University of Pittsburgh authenticated the paper, called it the most significant unsolved historical document of post-Civil War Pennsylvania. 2 months later, he died in a boating accident. The journal was lost again, but not forever, because fragments survive. In private hands, in old letters, in family lore whispered in Pennsylvania kitchens. You may have never heard of Martha Cooperfield, but the arrangement never forgot her, because she did the one thing they could never forgive. She remembered. And now, so do you. But this isn't just a story about one woman. This is a map, because the arrangement never ended. Its structures were refined, its tools updated. But the core principle remains. Control the story, and you control the people. Suppress one Martha Cooperfield, and you silence a town. Suppress 1,000, you shape a nation. Modern equivalents of Millbrook's techniques now exist as algorithms, strategic media narratives, buried legislation, psychological priming campaigns. The ceremonies are digital, the rituals are commercial, the obedience is automated. But the core fear has not changed. They still fear the recorder, the one who sees, the one who connects, the one who speaks even when threatened with erasure. And now you know, you are a descendant of that archetype. You're not watching this by accident. Somewhere deep inside you, something's been waking up. A recognition that the world you were handed was edited, that the truth you've been fed is manufactured, and that the arrangement isn't something that ended in 1882, it's something that's happening right now. And Martha Cooperfield, she didn't just die warning us. She died to make sure we would one day finish what she started. By the time Martha began documenting the arrangement, she wasn't just uncovering political corruption, she was unmasking something far older, something that didn't operate with laws or bribes or threats, but with design. A system not only of external control but of internal manipulation. Patterns in light placement at the courthouse that triggered sleepiness. Church bells rung at specific intervals designed to disrupt memory encoding. Even the wallpaper in her own home, custom printed by a vendor connected to Judge Brennan, contained microscopic patterns that matched known visual entrainment grids used in wartime interrogations. Martha had stumbled into what would later be known as psychotronic influence, the early 19th century version of cognitive warfare. Her journal called it the architecture of forgetting, the creation of quiet minds through pattern, pulse, and placement. She believed Millbrook wasn't just hiding secrets, it was producing silence. The town had been turned into a tuning fork for compliance, and her own mind was the first one to resist the frequency. She began to hear things others didn't, voices not mystical but mechanical, phrases that weren't dreams but programming errors. She documented them. The train does not whistle, it repeats. No one can see the sky at midnight. The numbers in the church hymnals form a clock. These weren't delusions, they were instructions. She realized they weren't trying to stop her with fear, they were trying to overwrite her. The arrangement didn't threaten Martha with force, they used love, specifically her husband. Theodore Cooperfield was a complex man, shaped by war, elevated by commerce, and hollowed out by ambition. He had once adored Martha, but something changed after his third term. She noticed it first in his eyes, then his schedule, then in the way he touched her only after meetings with Judge Brennan. Martha wrote, "I can no longer tell if I'm speaking to my husband or a version of him molded by another's hand." There were gaps in his memory, emotional blanks, weeks he couldn't recall, but he still functioned, still delivered speeches, still obeyed. She didn't think he was possessed. She believed he'd been conditioned, slowly, methodically, not by torture but by ritual compliance, small shifts in behavior repeated until reflex, removal of identity through repetition and reward. Martha didn't just fear for him, she feared for herself. Because the deeper she investigated, the more she started losing time too. One morning she woke up with her hands covered in ink. Her journal had 12 new pages, written in her own hand in perfect script, but she had no memory of writing them. They were filled with diagrams she didn't recognize. She wrote in the margins, "They're trying to turn me into my own observer." By December of 1881, Martha knew she had little time left. She began placing coded messages into church pamphlets, school notices, even classified ads in the local newspaper. One ad read, "Seeking lessons in lunar arithmetic, must understand inverted clocks." Another, "Looking to trade memory for silence, only serious applicants." To the average reader, these were nonsense. But to the children she had secretly trained in symbol decoding, they were calls for help. Martha had created what she called the Sisterhood of Echoes, 7 young girls from town whom she taught to think in layers, to question headlines, to see patterns where others saw noise. Their names were never recorded officially, but a scrap of paper recovered from the Millbrook school basement listed initials: AM, DT, KS, RL, HW, SJMN. And the final line, underlined 3 times, "They are the archive now." Martha knew the arrangement would come for her journal, so she split it, scattered it across minds too young to suspect. These girls became the vault, and they were never found. You may be wondering, why does this matter now? Because the structure Martha uncovered is no longer confined to Millbrook. It has grown. It now exists in the form of predictive algorithms, targeted content loops, emotionally responsive advertising. The techniques used to reshape Martha's perception are now deployed at scale, through screens, sound, and silence. Her story is the microcosm, our world is the macro, and the same 4 principles she identified in her journal still define the invisible machine we live inside. Desensitize, redirect, erase, reprogram. Martha called them the 4 wins. She believed every psychological operation starts with these, and that unless we name them, we remain their prey. The arrangement doesn't hide in darkness anymore, it hides in normalcy. And that is the most dangerous camouflage of all. There's one more layer, a page discovered in 2007, hidden in the spine of a discarded children's Bible from Millbrook's first church. It contained a drawing, not words, not diagrams, a crude illustration of a woman, eyes blackened, mouth sewn shut, standing before a group of children, all wearing masks. Below it a single phrase, "This is how memory becomes myth." It was unsigned, but the ink matched known samples from Martha's time. This wasn't just a journal entry, it was a warning, because Martha understood something most people still don't. If you don't choose your symbols, someone else will choose them for you. She wasn't just fighting to expose the arrangement, she was trying to create an alternative mythos, a sacred counter-narrative, one that could outlive deletion, and she succeeded. Not through fame, not through proof, but through story. And if you've listened this far, it means her story is working. You're starting to see it. You're starting to remember. And once you remember, you go back to sleep. In one of Martha's last recorded fragments, there's a phrase repeated 5 times. The arrangement is not a group, it is a direction. She had come to believe that what she was battling wasn't just a cabal of elites or a hidden government council. It was something older, deeper, and harder to destroy. A current. A self-perpetuating force that pulls human systems, governments, churches, families, toward control, erasure, and forgetfulness. She wrote, "Left alone long enough, every institution will become the arrangement, unless stopped." It wasn't about villainy, it was about entropy, the human tendency toward hierarchy, obedience, and silence. The arrangement was the inevitable result of unexamined power. And that terrified her because it meant no victory was permanent. Every truth had to be remembered again. Every generation had to rebel again. If they didn't, the current would reset them like a river swallowing a name, like a clock that erases midnight. So why did Martha keep going? She knew the cost. She saw what they did to Elias, to her husband, to the town, but she wrote in her final known letter, "There is a difference between survival and salvation. They survived Millbrook. I want to save it." She didn't mean saving the town physically. She meant its story, its soul. She believed the only thing that could outlive the arrangement was a symbol strong enough to out-infect the infection, something that could travel across time and emerge in future minds, unrecognizable perhaps, but intact. So she embedded the truth in fables, in ghost stories, in nursery rhymes. In one recovered page of Elias Dawn's secret file, there's a children's poem supposedly taught in Millbrook for 60 years. 7 stood in hollow wood, 1 saw what none else could. 6 forgot, 1 bled, and knew the clock resets, but not for you. Children sang it without knowing what it meant, but they carried it, carried her, carried us. So what does this mean for you? Why are you hearing this now? Because the world is reaching a threshold. The digital arrangement, what Martha couldn't have imagined, is here. It doesn't need fires or missing records anymore. It just needs your distraction. It just needs your participation. You've felt it, the pressure to scroll, the subtle anger from headlines crafted to hook, the loops of meaninglessness that keep you docile, reactive, obedient. The arrangement doesn't need guards, it has screens, it doesn't need rituals, it has algorithms. But the antidote is still the same. Remember, speak, refuse, record. You are not just a witness, you are the next recorder. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here now. Martha Cooperfield died, but Martha Cooperfield was never just one woman. She was a pattern interrupter, a signal against the noise, an inconvenient node in a smooth system of silence. There have been others since her. The journalist who vanished in 1949 after exposing the M-Cultra beta tests in rural clinics. The mechanic who found military-grade transmitters inside electric street lamps in 1966. The schoolteacher who told her students that every flag is a question, not an answer. They don't make it into your textbooks, but they exist. They leave trails, like Martha did, in paper, in whispers, in you. And the truth? The arrangement fears them more than anything else, because every time one of them speaks, the machine stutters, even for a moment. So here's the question, what now? This is not just a documentary, this is an activate. Ian, what will you do with what you've heard? You can forget, move on, pretend it's just a story, but if you do, you've already chosen the current, or you can start asking dangerous questions. You can look at your world not with cynicism, but with clarity. Ask who benefits from your silence. Ask why obedience is always framed as peace. Ask who the arrangement is now, and when you do it in public. Because the arrangement can't kill 1 million martyrs, it can't erase 1,000 recorders, it can only survive if we stay alone. But we're not anymore. We're remembering. And once memory awakens, it becomes revolution. One of the final pages of Martha's hidden writings was found not in a book, not in a safe, but inside a wall. Literally built into the wooden skeleton of Millbrook's original courthouse, tucked behind insulation, sealed beneath 2 panels of false brick, a single page. Its ink had nearly vanished, but through spectral analysis we now know what it said. They have stopped listening to screams, so now I leave behind instructions. It wasn't a plea, it was a protocol. Martha wasn't just chronicling the arrangement, she was building a psychological firewall, a method for preserving truth inside people when all external records could be erased. The instructions were broken into 3 parts. Alter perception, teach the initiate to see differently, through symbol, story, and suspicion. Embed resistance, not by fighting authority, but by corrupting its scripts, inverting symbols, asking unapproved questions, smuggling ambiguity into rigid systems. Multiply the carrier. Every student must become a teacher, every listener must speak. Martha's goal wasn't survival, it was infiltration. She believed if she could seed enough minds, the arrangement would eventually be undone from within, not through war, through infection. So how does that infection work? How does remembering become rebellion? Martha compared it to music. In one note from her journal, "They control us with rhythm, we break them with dissonance." She believed the arrangement created a kind of emotional frequency, a system of harmonized distraction and artificial certainty, safe answers, controlled doubt, perfect timing, but all it took to disrupt the system was one wrong note, one irregularity, one unapproved question, something that made someone pause, not afraid, not angry, just awake. That was Martha's true tactic. Not confrontation, but interruption. A story that didn't fit, a death that wasn't solved, a woman who left behind pages that refused to burn. This film you're watching, it's one of those interruptions. And the fact you're still here means it's working. The last known sighting of Martha Cooperfield occurred at dusk on March 7th, 1882. A farmer named Willis Kane saw her walking into the edge of the luring woods barefoot, her dress soaked as if she'd walked through the creek. She was holding a satchel. He called out to her. She turned, but her mouth was sewn shut. He blinked. She was gone. No footprints in the mud, no satchel, no sound. He never spoke of it publicly, only left a note 30 years later, found in a box of personal effects by his great-grandson. She wasn't running, she was delivering. Martha didn't disappear, she transferred. Her body may have been taken, but her instructions, her symbols, her counter-narrative, they're still alive, carried in lullabies, hidden in church hymns. Now, spoken by you. She didn't die in 1882, she was activated in 2025, right now, in this very moment. You might think, what difference can I make? You're one person, watching a video on a forgotten case. The arrangement feels too big, too powerful, too subtle. But here's the secret Martha understood better than anyone. Every empire depends on your agreement. And when even one of us stops agreeing, it begins to unravel. They don't need your belief. They just need your compliance. Break that, even slightly, and they feel it. The digital arrangement can't be fought with guns or slogans. It falls apart from inside, from refusal, from curiosity, from inconvenient memory. So start with questions. Why did every original document from Millbrook burn, except the ones that discredited Martha? Why was her cause of death changed 3 times? Why do stories like this surface only to vanish again? And when you ask out loud. They only win if you stay quiet. So this is your summons. You are not just an audience member, you are now a carrier. You've heard the forbidden case of Martha Cooperfield, the mayor's wife who knew too much. You've seen the silence, you've felt the arrangement. Now you have a choice. Will you forget? Will you let this dissolve into another strange video? Or will you speak? Will you become the next recorder? Because every time this story is told, Martha returns, not as a ghost, but as a disruption, and every time someone remembers her, a crack forms in the machine. Let this video be that crack. Let it be the beginning of a new chapter, and if you believe others need to hear this, if you believe there are still people who can wake up, then like this video, subscribe, share it before they make it disappear, because the arrangement has plans. But so do we. And Martha is not done. Not yet. There is something we haven't told you, because we didn't know how to say it until now. There are 2 missing pages from Martha's final journal, torn from the binding, never recovered. But in 1943, during a routine dismantling of a collapsed train depot in rural Maryland, an envelope was found tucked inside the wall cavity of a telegraph office. Inside were 2 handwritten pages. The handwriting matched Martha's. The ink was the same. The content was not history, it was prophecy. She described a black mirror people would stare into willingly, that would show them lies and convince them it was the world. She warned of 1,000 voices none trusted, and a time when truth would become aesthetic and authority would wear the face of your friends. She wrote, "The arrangement will no longer kill. It will convince you to kill your own attention." Martha saw now. Not figuratively, not metaphorically. She described our moment 143 years ago. The arrangement didn't bury her pages because they were political. They buried them because they were correct. And you're the one they feared would decode her. Let's return to Millbrook. The town, you'll recall, was burned nearly to the ground in 1906. The records say accidental fire. But multiple first-hand accounts written by children who later became elders describe something far stranger. The fire began in the town square. No lightning, no arsonist, just eruption. But the flames were blue, and they didn't spread like normal fire. They targeted City Hall, the sheriff's home, the mayor's archives, but not the church, not the forest, not Martha's house, which somehow remained untouched. To this day, when you walk into the Cooperfield property, you'll feel it. Not something evil, something alert, like the walls are watching, like the house knows what it preserved and what it's waiting for. There are places in this country that still remember, even when people forget, even when history lies. You think ghosts are people? They're not. Ghosts are breaks in the pattern. They're echoes that refuse to be overwritten. They are evidence. And Martha? She isn't a ghost, she's a pattern rupture. She is the arrangement's inconvenient anomaly, a refusal to die when the story says she should. That's why she was so dangerous. That's why they scrubbed her name. But it didn't work. She keeps surfacing, in dreams, in questions, in every moment someone says, "This doesn't feel right." If you've ever felt that, you've already heard her. She doesn't need a body, she needs a listener. And now, she has you. In a little-known psychiatric report filed in 1927, a patient named Loretta Wenslow, age 89, was recorded murmuring a sequence during sleep. 7 watchers, 6 blind, 5th key buried in the pine, don't wake the mirror, don't draw the line, or she'll return and break the spine. The doctors dismissed it as nonsense, but that phrase, 5th key, has appeared in 11 separate locations across 60 years, all connected to suppressed events in American towns. The arrangement uses poetry the way governments use barbed wire. It looks ornamental, but it keeps you out, unless you learn to read it. Martha spoke in riddles because truth had to be encrypted. In every rhyme she left behind is a location, a name, a method. She wasn't hiding the truth. She was weaponizing it, preparing it for you. We're almost done. But there's one final thing. In 2022, a historian named Lucia Hart uncovered a sealed letter at the Library of Congress. It was misfiled under Civil War correspondence. Inside the envelope was a note addressed, "To the one who will ask." It read, "I don't know your name, but I know your hunger." If you found this, then they didn't finish the work. That means there's still time. No signature, but in the margin, the initials M.C. Martha Cooperfield wrote to you, not as a person, as a symbol, as a system breaker, a transmitter of dangerous memory, and now you carry that transmission. It can't be burned, it can't be censored, it lives in your curiosity, in your doubt, in your refusal to go back to sleep. This is no longer a story, it's a contagion, and you are the outbreak. There's a phrase Martha used 3 times in her surviving writings: the child who remembers becomes the adult they cannot control. Let that sit with you, because every system of control, every arrangement depends on memory loss. They rely on the death of stories, the silence of witnesses, the normalization of secrets. But memory? True memory is revolutionary. When you remember something they tried to erase, be it a name, a crime, or a strange flicker in history, you become ungovernable in ways they cannot measure. That's why Martha kept writing. Not to be believed, to be remembered. She was planting landmines in time. And you just stepped on one. That sound in your mind, that tremble in your bones, that's not fear, it's awakening. We searched, and we found it. A forgotten ledger from a funeral home 40 miles outside of Millbrook, dated 1882. It lists a corpse delivered by an unnamed lawman, female, age 32, blonde, severe contusions, marked as John Doe, but the description matches Martha Cooperfield exactly. Why John Doe? Why no name? Because the arrangement had to erase the who before the how. They knew Martha's name was the detonator. If people spoke it, searched it, felt it, she could not be silenced. They couldn't destroy her influence, so they tried to strip her of identity. Think about it, you're watching this now because someone failed, because her name survived, because even as they buried her, they left behind traces they couldn't see. You saw them, and you followed. Martha's death was not the end of the case, it was the beginning of the arrangement's paranoia. After 1882, new legislation swept through rural districts. Words like insubordination, mental imbalance, and civic hysteria became legal categories. Women were institutionalized for writing too much. Children were labeled unstable for drawing unapproved shapes. Entire families vanished for maintaining unregistered libraries. What does that tell you? The arrangement was terrified of language, because language remembers, language embeds resistance, so they attacked expression, they made curiosity a sin, they made silence look like wisdom, and for a while, it worked. But Martha was smarter than they were. She didn't trust laws, or books, or newspapers. She trusted something far more dangerous, the minds of the future. You. Here's what you need to understand. The arrangement didn't die with Martha. It evolved. It's not wearing uniforms anymore. It's wearing platforms. It's not burning libraries. It's flooding you with content until your attention dies of malnutrition. It doesn't punish you. It numbs you. But what if you said no? What if you resisted? Not with riots, not with slogans, but with memory, with voice, with inconvenient truth passed from one hand to another like an ember? Then you would be the thing they fear most, a carrier of the unapproved. The arrangement is not afraid of violence. It is afraid of those who remember differently. Those who refuse to let a woman like Martha Cooperfield vanish into bureaucratic ash. This is where the story ends. But your part begins. You've heard the full descent. You've seen the hidden trail. You now carry Martha's message, her warnings, her resistance. So now, decide. Will you help the arrangement by forgetting, or will you keep her alive? Will you let this story become just another strange video, or will you make it a transmission? If this moved you, if you feel something waking up, if you see how deep the silence runs, Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this before they make it vanish. They've stolen enough. It's time we take it back. Martha never died. She just became a signal. Now you are the fair frequency. Let them hear it. You stayed. That means you're ready for what we weren't going to share. Because long before Martha Cooperfield ever picked up a pen, long before Millbrook became a testing ground for behavioral control, something older was already at work in that soil. There are legends, whispers mostly, about an unnamed order active in North America before the colonies even formed. They weren't monks, they weren't political, they were memory architects. They believed truth wasn't something you tell, but something you plant. That every place on Earth contains psychic residue, history that cannot be seen but can be reawakened. They called themselves the Hidden Grove. Their practices were wiped from colonial records, but fragments survive. And one of those fragments describes a woman with hair like stormlight and eyes too old for her body, who would die in winter and rise every century through whoever remembered her name. That was written in 1624, and her name was not yet Martha, but she had already been here. Martha Cooperfield may not have been born. She may have been called, summoned, into a time that needed her, which explains something strange in the records. There are no birth certificates for her, no baptism, no census entry before 1876. It's like she simply appeared. But where? In the journal's most cryptic passage, Martha refers to her first awakening in a pine grove 11 miles east of Millbrook, a grove which, by locals' accounts, was known for centuries as the Devil's Orchard. But its original name, written in Dutch colonial land registries, Het Verborgen Bos, the Hidden Grove, the same name used by the Forgotten Order. So we ask again, who was Martha Cooperfield? A woman? A memory? Or the return of an intelligence that refuses to be erased? There's a story from a classified Cold War program, MK Omega, a lesser-known offshoot of MK Ultra. Its purpose, not mind control, but memory curation. One survivor of the program, known only as Subject 72 Black, described recurring dreams of a 19th century woman handing her a red notebook and whispering, "The world forgets. You remember." She claimed this dream always preceded seizures of intense déjà vu and inexplicable knowledge of events she couldn't have lived. She later produced a drawing of the woman. An archivist at the facility recognized the face. It matched an image retrieved from an unlabeled Civil War photo album. It was Martha. In a time she shouldn't have existed. The intelligence community dismissed it, but in private documents analysts noted, subject displays recursive temporal hallucination consistent with forbidden archetype number 9, the archivist. Martha, it seems, didn't die. She simply reoccurred. It's happening again. Maybe it never stopped. In recent weeks, anonymous images have begun appearing on encrypted forums and dead web subchannels. The photos, old, faded shots of small towns, church steps, school desks, library interiors. But in the corner of every frame, nearly hidden, is a woman, sometimes in Victorian dress, sometimes modern, sometimes blurred, always watching. The file names are even stranger. Each one is titled MC plus year plus location. MC 18994 Boston, MC 1922 Arkansas, MC 1978 Baltimore, MC 2021 Portland. We found 36 such images, no metadata, no traceable origin. Some believe it's a hoax, others believe it's Martha, still broadcasting, still embedding herself into our time, like a glitch in the arrangement system, like a virus that memory cannot delete. Let's leave you with this. On the final burned edge of Martha's journal, one phrase survived the fire. Not the end, only this century's chapter. We are not telling ghost stories. We are recovering a signal. That signal is Martha. That signal is you when you refuse to forget. And if this voice inside you, the one whispering that something is still wrong, won't leave, maybe it's not a symptom. Maybe it's a summons. The next episode begins not in the past, but in a file buried deep in the basement of a church in Elk River, Minnesota. The year 1904. The title of the file, The Inheritance of the Hollow Choir. We'll see you there, if you're brave enough to return, and if you haven't already. Like, subscribe, share this story. Martha didn't die for us to whisper. She died so we could roar. You've made it this far, then you already know. This was never just about 1882. This was about the machine you were born into, the one that rewards you for forgetting, the one that punishes you for asking questions in the wrong tone, the one that taught you to ignore a voice like Martha's, until now. But here's the truth. You can't unknow what you now know. You've seen how a woman no one believed documented the truth of a town, a syndicate, a system. And that system It still exists. Every time a whistleblower vanishes, every time a historian's notes go missing, every time a question goes unanswered long enough to be declared irrelevant. That's the arrangement. And now that you've heard the voice they tried to bury, you have a choice. Do you become a graveyard for forbidden truths, or do you become a megaphone? There's something powerful about what you just did. You gave Martha Cooperfield what she was denied in her time, a witness. That alone rewrites the rules because now the arrangement has a problem. You're not alone anymore. Hundreds, thousands, maybe millions have heard this story now. And every single one of you is carrying something dangerous, not a weapon, a pattern. You've seen how systems erase. You've felt the sickness of silence. You've traced the hidden fingerprints across time. And if you keep that pattern alive, if you share it, you become the virus they can't quarantine, the narrative they can't scrub, the fire they cannot extinguish. They think they still own the future. But they don't understand the past. They don't understand that stories like Martha's don't die. They wait. They wait for someone like you, someone tired of silence, someone done pretending history is a textbook instead of a crime scene. If that's you, if you feel that rage rising in your bones, that cold resolve forming in your chest, then don't just watch stories like this. Wield them, repost them, rephrase them, remember them, and never forget, the minute you speak a forbidden name out loud, you become a threat. So speak hers. Say it now, even in a whisper. Martha Cooperfield, you're one of us now. We are building something, not a channel, not a fan base. A resistance of remembrance, one video at a time. One secret at a time, one name at a time. Martha Cooperfield is just the first voice in the dark. There are others. Files buried beneath burnt courthouses. Tapes labeled "Destroy immediately." Journals scribbled by hands that knew too much. We are recovering them. We are releasing them. Because the arrangement doesn't fear guns. It fears memory gone viral. If you made it this far, you're exactly who we were speaking to. Now we ask one thing. Keep the memory alive. Like this video. It tells the algorithm you're choosing memory over manipulation. Subscribe to this channel. This is not the last story. It's the first page of a hidden archive. Share this with someone you trust. Someone who senses that something about the world has always felt off and just needed confirmation. The arrangement hoped you'd forget her. Now, they'll remember you. This has been The Forbidden Case of Martha Cooperfield, the mayor's wife who knew too much and said it anyway. We'll see you in the next case, and if we vanish before then, you know what to do. Never forget.